I'm recording my homily for the 34th Sunday in Ordinary Time. This is the last Sunday of Ordinary Time, which means that we're celebrating the feast day of Christ the King. So we always do that on the very last Sunday of our liturgical year. So next week we begin our new liturgical year with Advent, the season of Advent, right? So today I'm going to talk a little bit about just the whole idea of Jesus Christ as a king and his kingdom, and what his kingdom is and what it is not, right? So his kingdom is obviously different, right? We know that, because even though we might be tempted to think, oh, his kingdom is like, the church is his kingdom here on earth, the Catholic Church and his churches, and we can think of buildings and people, but I think his kingdom is a little, I don't want to say more difficult, a little bit more mysterious than just that. His kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. He says in the gospel today that if his kingdom was an earthly kingdom, then his attendants would be fighting for him, which should lead us to consider or to think about the fact that he doesn't necessarily want us to be defending him. He doesn't need us to be defending him. He has a different kind of kingdom. We shouldn't be worried about his kingdom here on earth and whether it survives or whether it grows or per se. We just need to be doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then the kingdom and God and the Holy Spirit and God's grace and all these things will take care of everything else. But his kingdom is different, right? So that's kind of what I want to go into today. Now, when you read the gospel for this Sunday, it almost sounds like Jesus' kingdom is not here, because he actually says that, right? He says, my kingdom is not here. Oh, I didn't mark the page. So he's talking to Pontius Pilate. You remember that conversation? So this is right before Jesus is going to be crucified. And he's having this very mysterious conversation with Pontius Pilate, where Pontius Pilate will ask him questions, and then he doesn't answer them, but he gives him a different answer. Okay, here we go. All right, so he says, my kingdom does not belong to this world. Now, on one hand, you could be reading and say, oh, his kingdom is not here. But that's not what he said. He said, my kingdom does not belong to this world, but his kingdom is still here, right? His kingdom is just different. So a king normally will have soldiers, and the soldiers will protect the earthly kingdom. But he didn't come for that. In some ways, he's going to do the opposite of that. He's going to give his life for the sake of the kingdom, for his people, right? So his kingdom is very different. But if there was ever a time you were to wonder or to feel like God's kingdom is just far from here, or especially if you're in the midst of darkness, you feel like his kingdom is not here. And that's not the case. Now, on some of the images behind me, you have images where there's light and darkness, right? So I love this image of Mary. You have the angels here, and they're playing on their little instruments, right? And you have the baby Jesus. You have this very peaceful circle, right? This very peaceful circle. They're safe, they're secure. Jesus is asleep. Everything is so peaceful. But look behind him. It's hard to see probably on there, but there's trees, and it's really dark, and it almost looks sinister. It's so dark back there, right? And when you look at it, it's like, what's back there? Well, there's the world, right? So you have this place of light and peacefulness and protection. And so when you see that, you can say, there's the kingdom. I see the kingdom, right? I see Jesus' kingdom here on earth. Because there's this circle, it's safe, it brings peace, right? You have this picture right here of Jesus being crucified, and there's a lots of light, and you have the angels around him, you have the Holy Spirit, you have God the Father, but behind it is darkness, right? But you see the kingdom, you say, I see the kingdom, right? I'm not sure. Yes, I think you can see it. The image of Padre Pio, right? So you have this image of Padre Pio. You have this light that's radiating around his head. Now, that's a halo. So on many of the saints, you'll see you'll see little halos, right? And often the halos are depicted as light radiating out from behind the saint. Now, you know what I see in that? I see that when we're in our world and we're looking for God's kingdom, we're looking for evidence of God at work, we encounter someone who's very holy, right? Now, these people are just like us, but they lived a life of holiness. And so the people around them would have seen that, and they would have seen that holiness, and they would have said, there's the kingdom. I see it. Now, a halo is a circle, right? It's always a circle. It's often a circle of light. And to me, it reminds me, it's like a family. You know, family, you have a circle, and it's safe there. There's a place of protection. There's a place of peace, right? There's a place of forgiveness, place of trust. And so that circle represents just that peacefulness that God wishes to bring, right? It's like it's a light emanating into our world. And when we see that, when we see the holiness in each other, when we see the holiness at work in the people around us, we say, there's the kingdom. I see it. I see the peacefulness of it, the security of it. I see Jesus Christ, right? Now, one of the things I wanted to talk today about is how Satan can tweak. He wants to tweak that just a little bit and turn it into the exact opposite. Because he knew if he came along and asked us to completely destroy our circle of peace, our circle of trust, our circle, the place where we have harmony, if he were to ask us to abandon it, we would say no. But what if he can tweak it just a little bit? So if you think of a circle that's tweaked just a little bit, it's a circle that begins to spin, right? Kind of like a hurricane. And so a hurricane, or you think of a tornado, and you think of this circle that as it begins to spin, and it begins to spin faster and faster, and you see hurricanes are massive, massive storms, right? But as they begin to spin, they begin to build up momentum, and they get more vicious and more vicious. And so he takes the circle of peace, and if he can get it just tweaked, just a little bit off center, he can turn that circle of peace into a hurricane, into a place of absolute chaos. I think that's what Satan's trying to do to our families. He tries to take that place of peace and he tweaks it just a little bit. He gets us off center. He gets us to forget our purpose in life and why we're supposed to be here. And then he turns that place of security and protection into a hurricane, into a place just of absolute chaos. And we see that around us all the time. But a hurricane has a center to it, right? Now, I know many of us have never been in the eye of a hurricane, but if you ever talk to somebody who has, they say it's an absolutely surreal experience. Because one minute you have 150 mile an hour winds blowing, one way, and then all of a sudden it's just complete peacefulness, and you're in the eye of the hurricane. And so you have this area where there's complete safety and peace. And so I think that circle is kind of like encountering a saint. It's encountering the eye of the hurricane in the midst of the chaos of our world. And so that's what people want to encounter in us. They want us to be like an eye of the hurricane, where we come in and we bring a place of safety and security and protection, right? We bring Jesus Christ, we bring His grace. Now, I'm going to give an example. I'm not going to, in my homily here on YouTube, I'm not going to go into it as much as I did in the church, because there's reasons for that. But there was something that happened not too long ago in my own family, and somebody in my family was hurt. And it was really hard for me to forgive, right, what had happened to this family member of mine. And so what I think Satan was trying to do in the midst of this was he took somebody that I love, somebody that's precious to our family, and he tried to just tweak that circle a little bit. And what he did was he turned that love in our family, at least in my heart, I struggled with it for a little while, he turned it into hatred. Not hatred for my family, but hatred for someone else. And because of that, it was Satan's way of attempting to destroy that light attempting to destroy any level of holiness, any level of peacefulness, any level of this is your place of safety and security. And so if he can fill my heart with anger and hatred, then that's the victory for him. That's what he wants. And I knew that in my mind when it was happening. I knew it's like, this is what Satan wants. But it was really, really hard to fight it. It was really hard to say, I need to be not going down that path. Because that's what Satan wants. He wants to take your heart, and he wants to take any kind of peacefulness, any kind of joy that you have, and he wants to just tweak it just a little bit and get it off center, right? And then he can turn it into the opposite. He can turn it into hatred or anger or desire for revenge. And then we just become his instruments. He plays us like a fool. And it's in those moments, too, we realize sometimes how weak we actually really are. You know, when our faith is put to the test. At the very end of the gospel, Jesus talks about how his purpose in the kingdom, the reason he came, is to testify to the truth. Now, to the truth to some of us, we might be like, I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, right? Truth. Okay, 1 + 1 = 2. That's truth. But that's a very sterile truth. That's very abstract. That's not gonna provide anybody with safety or security or a sense of peacefulness or purpose or mission, right? So what is the truth he's talking about? It's the truth that God brings beauty into everything. He can create beauty from anything. Now, God created beauty. We destroyed it. When we do evil, we destroy it. But he can recreate even something more beautiful. Even after we've sinned, God can create something even more beautiful. And that's the truth. That's the good news. Is Jesus Christ brings redemption, salvation. He brings peace and harmony. And that he wants us, all of us, to be part of that kingdom, all of that reign that he has here. Now, last week I talked a little bit about also kind of a storm, right? Or the fires in Paradise, California, and things of that nature. And I hope I didn't communicate to you all that on some level, Satan's power and Jesus' power are like equal, and they're battling it out. Because that's not the case at all. Satan has no power. Satan is the king of intimidation. He's the king of just being all talk. But he wants us to be afraid. And so he'll try to convince us that his power is equal to God or is much greater than God. And he does that again by, like I was saying, by tweaking things in our life, by getting us off balance so that we begin to fall out of the center and we begin to swirl around in this hurricane or this tornado. And we feel powerless. And we lose our bearings. And we turn away from God. And we turn towards other things for what we think will bring peacefulness, and then they don't. But in the end, we know that there's the eye of the hurricane, and in there is holiness. In there is where God is working. Now, the more people in a community that desire that holiness, the wider that eye of the hurricane becomes, the bigger it becomes. And in a hurricane, when you start expanding the eye of the hurricane out farther and farther, it completely loses its ability to spin or to have momentum, and it destroys the hurricane. All right? That's God's power at work. That's him desiring to work in our lives. Now, one last thought just on Jesus as King. I've never really completely understood or was able to enter into this idea of Jesus as a king, royalty, right? We don't have a monarchy in the United States. We don't have a sense of that allegiance to a single person per se. Our government is different than that. When I was in England too, I went to visit, and then when I was in London, and you have the Royal Guard and those things like that, you very quickly realize that you are not part of that entourage, right? You're just not part of it. You're a bystander. You're a tourist, whatever. And so when they're walking around, when the Royal Guard is walking around, if tourists are in their way, they just walk right over them. I mean, it's brutal. They'll just scream and yell at them and walk right through them. And you feel very quickly, it's like, okay, I don't belong here. I mean, I'm not part of it. I'm just a bystander. And so it'd be a mistake for us to see Jesus' kingdom as that way. It's like God's kingdom is so powerful, it just bulldozes through everybody, and I'm just a bystander. Not at all. Not at all, right? Now, just like they have big processions for the kings, we have a procession too. When did Jesus process? Now, you might be thinking, well, when he came into Jerusalem, yeah, he processed. But when was his real procession? When did he demonstrate his true power? When he processed with the cross. When he carried that cross, that was the most powerful procession any king has ever made. And he was wearing his crown, he was king, and he was carrying his throne, right? And that throne is known everywhere in the world. There is no mistaking that throne, his cross. And what he invites us to do is to follow him. To be holy is to follow him. It's not to observe him. It's not even just to understand him. But it is to follow him. And that's why he says, take up your cross daily. Follow him. And then we enter and we know the kingdom. And that's when we bring light, by God's grace, into the world. Now, again, my last thought on this. You know, the kings of old, the kings in the medieval days, they would, when times were really desperate and they needed to go into battle, and his soldiers knew they were going to lose, and there was nothing that would rally the soldiers, the king only really had one choice. And if the king had to do this, he would do it. And the king would not lead from the back, but he would lead from the front. And so he knew that if he charged into battle, if the king led the way, the soldiers had to follow. And the reason they had to follow the king was because they had to protect the king. They wanted to be with the king. They wanted to follow the king. And so if the king was going to go, everyone was going to go. And it wasn't even about the enemy per se. The enemy was irregardless, but they knew they had to follow their king. And so if the king led them into battle, they were going to go by golly, they were going to go into battle because of their love for the king. And so Jesus Christ, when he leads us into, when he goes into battle, and you're saying, well, where's he in battle? Any place there's darkness. He's bringing light. He wants to bring light. And we follow him, not because we're necessarily attacking the evil, but because we're going to be with our king. Because we love him. Because we love him. And it's not because we want to protect him. He doesn't need protection. But he loves us, and he's going to lead us. That cross, he's going to carry that cross right into the darkness, right into those places in your life where you probably don't want to go sometimes. And he's going to take us right in there, and he's going to help us to bring peace and light and safety and security and harmony and his love. All right, this is a great prelude to the season of Advent. The first 2 weeks of Advent, we focus on Jesus' second coming, right? And so Jesus, to the coming, that's what Advent means, to the coming. So come Lord Jesus. All right, God bless you.